All right, let's head over to the Zoom line for our YouTube channel, which will be converted into an audio as well for the radio and also the podcast. Mr. Joe Sinnott is our guest. How are you doing today, sir?
I am doing fantastic, Jason. Happy to be here with you.
How's Witting Partners doing these days? You're the CEO of Witting Partners. How's business been?
We are chugging along, helping people out, a little coaching, some workshops, occasional speaking, and happy to keep on doing what we're doing here at Witting Partners.
And of course, we'll talk about the Energy Detox a little bit later, the popular podcast by Joe Sinnott. But hey, we had some news come out of Minneapolis, my neck of the woods, if you will. Northern Oil and Gas invested 170 million, a nice chunk of change, might have been more than that. I'm going off of memory here, into the Marcellus. Talk to me a little bit about the Marcellus. Give kind of a 101 for dummies, if you will, what the Marcellus is, why Northern Oil and Gas might want to invest in the Marcellus. You know, they are active, I should say, down in Texas and in the Bakken in North Dakota. So that's good news, I would think. New companies coming out to the Marcellus, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine any company that wants to infuse some capital is a bad thing. It's typically a sign of, well, the health of the asset that they're want to be a part of, right? So I don't know much about the deal. I don't know much about Northern Oil and Gas other than, having the NOG ticker symbol, of course, this time of year brings up all kinds of obvious puns that you can make. But so while I don't know much about that, I do know plenty about the Marcellus. And heck, again, it makes all the sense in the world why people would be attracted to this massive, proven play. We got no shortage of gas. I'd argue we are, not just some of the cleanest molecules in the world, American molecules cleaner than anywhere in the world, but, even within the United States, again, I don't think you're going to find a more responsibly sourced, responsibly produced molecule of natural gas than you are here in Appalachia and in the Marcellus in particular. So, certainly it checks a lot of those boxes, Jason. And again, I'm a bit biased here, sitting just outside of Pittsburgh, but, we got the people, we got the expertise. And again, why wouldn't a company like Northern Oil and Gas or NOG want to be a part of it? So again, that's my 2 cents on, just what we have from the press release that popped up. But always happy to get into more detail about the Marcellus. I don't know if that's what we want to do today, but again, it has been and will continue to be a highly attractive opportunity for companies, in my opinion.
There's Joe Sinnott out in the Washington, PA area, Pittsburgh, PA area, Marcellus up there in the Ohio, New York, Pennsylvania, up there in the triangle, if you will. And good news. I mean, company investing into a shale play that the state of New York has been actively trying to ban and get rid of. So just, good. I pay attention to these little things, and I'm like you. I don't necessarily deep dive in on the company. I don't necessarily deep dive in on the deals so much. It's more tracking the trends. And okay, what is this shale play all about? What is this energy play all about, if you will? And up in the Marcellus, it's good news when you can see the addition rather than the subtraction. I did want to talk about annual meetings and reports as well. Just get some insight and some advice from you. I mean, that's kind of what you do for a living, is you coach people on getting ready for their annual reports so that they can execute them out, and you, of course, help people execute them as well. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the college football playoffs and some of the lessons that we can glean from the college football playoffs, maybe to banter back and forth and maybe even take away a few teachable moments, if you will, Joe Sinnott. And of course, the college football playoffs, there's been a debate over this for years. They tried the 4-team playoff. It really didn't work out very well. Florida State, an undefeated team, got left out because their quarterback got injured in the final game, which really kind of opened up Pandora's box into a bunch of issues with a 4-team college football playoffs. I guess when you're trying to, take 1,000 colleges down to one, it becomes a little bit tricky when you only have four. My number one thing about this year's college football playoffs, Joe, is that this is a great opportunity for business owners and executives to learn sometimes you have to let the mistakes play out. Meaning that they're controlled mistakes and they're not going to devastate you and they're not going to put you out of business. But there's going to be some things that you might know is maybe not the best or most popular move, but it's going to move you along and you can come back and iron it out afterwards. But at least you got to see how it played out and you got to see the pros and the cons and process a little bit. Joe, do you know what I'm talking about when I say sometimes you do have to let the mistakes play out so you can go back and become a stronger organization than when you were?
Yeah, and I think that speaks to an element of leadership and organizations that is often lacking, and that's patience, right, Jason? It's, sometimes it's difficult to wait for those mistakes to play out and, be confident in your long-term plan and trust that, you're going to get those lessons learned and the data, and you're going to come back and you're going to be stronger in the long run. It's especially difficult for public companies that, again, have, investors who are looking for those immediate results in a lot of cases. So, yeah, Jason, I think I'm on the same page as you. I think I was following along there. And again, that's what I see and that's what I think of because, again, tying this back to annual meetings and strategy meetings and everything else, it's the same thing, right? It's, hey, look, it's easy to spend a lot of time and energy. Oh, am I going to make a mistake when it comes to my prediction for commodity prices over the next 12 months? Well, yeah, nobody's going to get that right. And as cliche as it is, all right, well, what can you control that's not going to change? That, is commodity price proof, if you will, if that even makes sense. It's going to be able to be relevant no matter what happens that's beyond your control. It forces you to go down that positive path and not waste all that time, energy, trying to be psychic or trying to, predict every little mistake and how it's going to play out. So again, I think the number one thing that kind of what you're speaking to and that I see in the business world is how valuable a patient leader and a patient culture can be for all stakeholders.
When I take a look at the college football playoffs, you've got your top four teams that get a bye. And then those games will be played at a neutral site, which are former bowl stadiums, if you will, the Rose Bowl, the Fiesta Bowl, et cetera, et cetera. The first round games, they're home games. And for the first time in college football, this is a real home field advantage for some of these northern teams. Some of these teams that play in snow, are you kidding me? USC, they've never played in snow. A lot of these teams from the southern part of the United States, because the college football season is basically over before Thanksgiving, they've never had to play in a snow bowl. And so when I think of a home field advantage, they always talk about that in business, Joe, the home field advantage, maybe bring in the people into your organization so you can wine or let them see the operation, or wining and dining them out type of a thing. Talk to me about the importance of whatever the home field advantage is in business or your organization. It is a real thing. Sometimes it can be the sound and some of those other things and everything else. But when you're talking about elements and weather, not to talk about the oil play or anything like that, people that go up to North Dakota, man, they're fracking at minus 18 degrees.
Right.
They would kill to go down to the Permian, down in the desert where it's 112 degrees instead of, it's a little flip there. But home team, talk about the home team and the home field advantage, even the psychology behind it too.
Yeah, gosh. Well, I got about half a dozen different things that popped into my head as you were talking. I guess one, let's come back to what we talked about earlier, the Marcellus, right? How often up in this part of the world does somebody need to say, hey, this ain't Texas? Sometimes there's an extra letter thrown in there for emphasis to create a TAFT acronym, but we'll keep it PG here. This ain't Texas. And a lot of that ties into sort of the land situation up here and the topography, right? It's not as straightforward in this part of the world as other parts of the world. So people have come to, Appalachia and been surprised. This ain't what they're used to. And again, so it plays out. We don't have to go too far down this path, but certainly we see it in the oil and gas industry all the time that, yeah, there are people on their home turf that are going to have a leg up from a business savvy standpoint, even beyond what you would expect, which is, of course, connections with local suppliers and everything else. But, there are some major implications on some important things like, again, land and topography and all the logistics that come with that. So that's one thing that popped into my head. The other thing is, you might think you have a strength, an advantage, if you will, but a lot of times, you lose sight of the things that could neutralize that strength, right? You build an entire business plan around this theoretical differentiator without just asking the simple question, say, hey, what are all the things that could disrupt this strength, this advantage of mine? And I speak to that from the perspective of a Notre Dame alumnus and fan who, again, Notre Dame is one of those teams that, they've known for, 2 weeks now that they're going to have a home game. And it was kind of like, hey, look, maybe one of those Southern schools will come up and that'll be eye-opening if it's 15 degrees and snowing at, 8 p.m. at night. But again, their advantage was neutralized. They're going to be playing Indiana in the state of Indiana. So it's not like, it's going to be that big of an advantage. So that's another thought to say, hey, look, that's great to have your strengths. Take the time to ask, all right, well, what can neutralize those? And the third thing, Jason, I thought of when you were talking about just the way it works, right? Logistically, for those who don't know, you shared that, the top 4 teams, well, not the top 4 teams necessarily get a bye. And, what's significant about that is, some of those first round buys are given to automatic qualifiers, no matter how, they're ranked. If, they're one of the top 4 conference champions, they're going to get an automatic bye. And what you found is that some of these schools that are higher ranked, but aren't getting a bye because they were passed up by, an automatic bid, they're saying, hey, this really doesn't make sense. Shouldn't it just be the top 4 teams? And I bring that up, Jason, again, from a Notre Dame perspective, because Notre Dame does not qualify for one of those top 4 or one of those 4 buys because they're not in a conference. But what's funny, Jason? Because you could argue they're patient or maybe passive. Now these other big schools from the big conferences are now starting to make the case for Notre Dame almost unwittingly, right? They're saying, hey, we should, we're better than, Clemson, for example. We should be getting a bye. Why aren't we? And Notre Dame's just kind of sitting back and saying, it's almost like we might be able to make that same case. So again, it's another example of either, the value of being patient, but more significantly, asking yourself how you can have allies that, maybe you wouldn't have seen as allies normally make the case for you. Nothing's more powerful than if somebody else is making your case for you, right? So again, like I said, a lot of different thoughts popped in my head. I'm going to stop there because I've gone on enough. But those are 3 kind of different angles that I see that, again, play out in the business world just as much as they do in the college sports world, Jason.
Thanks for doing on video. You can see I've bitten my tongue. I was biting my tongue while you were talking because
because I was talking too much. That's okay.
No,
See, that's good.
no,
That's the beauty of this. See, that's me missing those clues to say, oh boy, Joe, wrap it up. You can't just unload all of the, clearly you're enthusiastic about the playoffs and what's going to transpire when Notre Dame has this historic first ever home playoff game. But
I have this theory.
My apologies, Jason.
I have this theory, and you were percolating my political blood, if you will. And I am not one to try to get political. In fact, we try hard on the Crude Life specifically not to be political. With This Week in Energy, we try specifically not to be political. Doesn't mean we won't talk policy, but we don't want to incite the flames. There's too many other people doing that. We want to give people good creative information. We want to think outside the box. We want to get innovative ideas out there. We want to showcase ethical energy, if you will. And as you were talking, the college football playoffs are un-American. You know that? They're absolutely un-American, and here's why. America is about rigs to riches, rags to riches. We are about the American dream, and Notre Dame cannot achieve that American dream because they have to work a little bit harder. They're the Rudy. They're the literal Rudy of the college football playoffs because they will never be able to be one of those top 4 teams. They are not a part of the entitled economy. There's my political part. The entitled economy that sports has ushered into our political ways. Think I'm kidding? 20 years ago, I used to say that politics is turning into the WWE. Instead of headlocks and arm bars, they're using bullet points and sound bites, okay? And when you take a look at today, that's all they do is they verbally go back and forth, but it's a choreographed ballet. It's an orchestrated dance, really what's going on there. And when I started seeing that Sean Hannity became the sports announcer of politics, I went, oh, so they are ushering in the competitive sports. We're always right, speculative nature, right? Because, hey, after the NFL draft, every team is going to win the Super Bowl. Every team. Just ask their fans. You don't even have to ask them. They're going to tell you. The Carolina Panthers were going to win the Super Bowl last year, man. They got that Xavier Leghow-worthy guy in the last pick of the draft, man. Forget Caleb Williams. We got, so that's the thing that bothers me is that here's Notre Dame, a proven powerhouse, a proven money maker. And let's not kid ourselves here. At the end of the day, football, whether it's college or NFL, is an entertainment business. Competition comes second. And it's a little bit concerning that the college level has been so infected by the NIL, the transfer portal, college betting, and now we've got this new issue coming in of the college playoffs. I mean, don't get me started on the Pop-Tarts Bowl and the Tostitos Bowl and all these other things. Now, does it totally bother me? No. But I see the bigger picture here. If I were to put my ESG lens on, my environmental social governance lens on, I'd probably have a cardiac arrest at if I follow that supply chain, Joe. So that's my little soapbox moment here, to where I see where sports really does shape culture. And right now there is a culture in college that's being shaped by corporate America, whether it's through the NIL, which is basically free agency, transfer portal, which is basically free agency. The NIL is basically contracts through agents, if you will. And then you have now this college football playoffs where 4 teams that they choose to be the best, not even the 4 teams in the country. It's the ones that the people decide are the best. And by the way, if you have an injury, you might not even make it. So at the end of the day, 12 teams who are not the best in the country are going to make it to the playoffs, which, by the way, that's how it should be. You should have some automatic bids. I love it when Ball State has a chance to make something of their program. Otherwise, it's just Alabama all the time. So what is your thought about the entitled economy now that I kind of went nuts on that?
Well, let's work backwards. On the automatic bids, I think I'm on the page. I mean, whatever. At the end of the day, there's more important things to care about. But, a lot of people, they're not upset about the automatic bids. It's the fact that, hey, you look at the NCAA basketball tournament, which is, some would argue it's, largely it's about as close to perfect as it can get. You have the automatic bids, but they're seeded potentially, 16 or, they're seeded appropriately. They don't get to jump to the front of the line. So,
right. You don't have a Richmond as a 4 seed. It doesn't happen.
Just because they want, So that's, I think that's
occasionally
for anybody that's not hip to all this and maybe has gotten lost by our conversation already, Jason.
Who was the one out in your neck of the woods? St. Peter? What did they get? A 4 seed maybe because they were 28-2 or something like that. So occasionally you sneak one in. Occasionally, but no, you're right. I mean, honestly, the Boise States and the Arizona States at best would have been a 10 seed in the college basketball at best. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So I don't know. I mean, I guess, again, bringing it back to the leadership world, the business world.
Let's just bring it back to the leadership world for a second.
Yeah.
Let's say you go work for a company, whether it's a family business or a corporate business. There's a lot of Notre Dames out there that know they will never be at that executive level because they're not part of that entitled economy. They're not part of the Power Five. And I had a millionaire friend of mine in North Dakota tell me that it's not a big deal that he made $1 million in the East Coast. They'll look at him and say, well, what generation millionaire are you? And he'll say first, and they'll say, well, if you're fifth, maybe we'll talk to you. Like even people who are third generation millionaires, they're being left out of certain entitled economies. So there is levels to the entitlement economy. To me, it's just like, whoa, it's just so in your face. Like Notre Dame's a legitimate historical, cultural, he could be your chief operating officer, but because he doesn't come from the Van Snauzen family, he'll never be part of the operating class. Does that make sense, Joe?
It does. And again, I feel like, gosh, we could spend hours on this, but let me tell you one thing that popped into my head. Because one, I'm not sure there's anybody in the country that would typically defend Notre Dame and say that they're not part of the entitled class. So I think this conversation is all kinds of bizarre. Let's acknowledge that first and foremost. But I think the other thing is from an ownership standpoint to say, all right, let's stick with Notre Dame here. If you're Notre Dame and you're not part of that, you can go back and say, well, what role did you have in not being a part of it? How bad was the former athletic director's negotiating skills that he didn't find some way to make sure that Notre Dame, isn't eligible for a bye? Or again, maybe it was brilliant. Maybe they relished the idea of having home games, and even if it means they have to win an extra game to get to the title game and potentially win it all. You don't know everything that went into this, other than to say, look, own it, right? Don't make excuses. Or as I said earlier, if people want to make excuses or maybe arguments on your behalf, that's fine. But don't you want to be seen as, hey, look, I'm able to rest on my own merits. I made, as you said earlier, Jason, mistakes. Maybe they mistakenly approached the negotiations with the whole playoff situation, whatever governing body owns all of that. So that's another way to look at this, Jason, to say, hey, look, before we start talking about entitlement and, special perks and privileges and everything else, let's start from a place of, okay, what could I do differently? What could I have done differently? Because that, again, it's clearly in the long run, that's what people are going to remember, right? That's going to serve you much better in the long run than coming across as whining because, you're only a first generation millionaire and not a fifth generation millionaire, if you will.
So if anybody ever wants to know what it's like to listen to one of our podcasts, you can say that we legitimately pointed out that Notre Dame was a victim this year in the college football playoffs.
We said that you pointed that out. I'm trying to be, again, apolitical and we're these are the facts. There are other people making those arguments, but
they're
I think it's a whole other level.
They're legitimately a victim. They could not be part of the top four. So it's a very loose interpretation, yes, but hey, we have to do that from time to time. We have to, they're not all award winners here, folks. They're not all award winners.
Might not be award winners, Jason, but hey, I don't think anybody else can find any sort of conversation that somehow manages to weave together college football, playoff controversies, the energy industry, leadership, and heck, what'd you throw in there? The WWE related tie-ins as well. So look at that.
Let's throw in the bus, Jerome Bettis. So I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but Jerome Bettis's brother and I are friends on LinkedIn. So not to name drop there or anything like that, John Bettis. He's in the oil and gas business. They do some supply chain work, if you will, some energy transportation and et cetera. So if you check it out if you'd like. But anyway, I get emails, quite a bit from them, and they have their donate to the bus just ended this past week. I think today actually is the final day where you can donate to Jerome Bettis's charity. And so many oil and gas workers are from...
For the record, I'm sure if he's like any charity, I'm sure I'm sure if you want to donate after this or after this airs, I'm sure the Bus Stops Here Foundation, I'm sure they would happily accept a donation. Let's be clear here.
They're not going to send it back and say, no, I'm sorry.
I don't think they're going to, it's not going to be a round trip on the bus. I don't think your donation's going to
the bus stops at December 13th. Sorry, folks. Jason Voorhees is in the house, so we get, that's right thing. But anyway, it got me thinking a little bit because, Jerome Bettis obviously is football, and there's a lot of football players in the oil and gas industry. We're starting to see Devon Energy, Rick Moncrief, he just stepped down, or stepping down March 1st. Exit strategies, legacies, if you will. Harold Hamm has gone on a campaign kind of helping define his narrative and his legacy. Sticking with sports a little bit, because, we can talk about Rick Moncrief, we can talk about Harold Hamm, we can talk about some of the others that have contributed to the oil and gas industry, but a lot of it does connect no matter what. And when I look at Bill Belichick going to the NFL, I think he's doing it for two reasons. Number one, I think he wants to reinvent himself. And number two, I think he wants to define his legacy without Tom Brady. He wants to set up the NFL feeder program so he will be known for something outside of being, could he with Tom or could he without? Because right now, his legacy is a question mark. It really is. If Tom Brady would not have went on and won Super Bowls with Tampa Bay, it wouldn't have been this way. But so there's that first example. Second example, I look at what Aaron Rodgers has done. I mean, he went into the season as a surefire Hall of Famer. Now his legacy has gotten so tarnished, he might not make the Hall of Fame, and he might not be back next year in the NFL at all. This is a surefire Hall of Famer beginning of the season. Now, let's take a flip on that and go to the Pittsburgh Steelers. You had a gentleman, Russell Wilson, coming off of butting heads, two personalities that did not. The talent was there on both sides. But because when two personalities, Joe, when they don't get along, people like to pick sides, especially in business. I mean sports. I mean business. I mean sports. Okay? So when you have a disagreement and people pick sides and you've got a competitive nature, you can really drive your heels in. To where Denver said, we're going to eat the 50-some million in cap space. It's against our better judgment, but we believe this is best for our organization. It's dead research and development, basically. If you're an oil and gas company, it's dead research and development. But then you find, when you get rid of it, the thing that came back was even better. Russell Wilson, actually, he might become a first ballot Hall of Famer now after this season, what he's doing with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Joe, you've got exit strategies and legacy. That is really important for executives. Talk to me a little bit how you would incorporate that into today's world, because it can change on a dime, Joe. And I just gave three examples of three people whose legacy is going to be redefined in 2 weeks.
Yeah, well, I'll give you some insight into how I work from a coaching standpoint, especially when it comes to career coaching, because I'll work with people that are, again, further along, and the word legacy comes up, and it starts with saying, well, what is legacy? How do you define legacy? And typically what people would gravitate towards is, well, it's what other people would say about you, right? That's pretty simple, right? What do you want other people to say about you? And that's a good question, but it's easily dismissed in the world of sports and in the world of business, especially oil and gas, because, right, we're tough. It's, typically the response is, well, I don't care what other people say about me, right? I'm going to plow along. How many times do you hear that from the toughest people? I don't care. I got thick skin. Yeah, but at the end of the day, that's legacy, right? What are other people seeing? What are they thinking? And that's where you need to start with these questions. Because if you don't start with that question of, all right, well, what's the ultimate measure? It's what other people are saying. When I work internally with companies, the best measure of progress for somebody that I'm coaching is what other people are seeing, what other people are saying. So even if you got thick skin, that's the metrics, right? And the problem that I see when it comes to, legacies or ending a career or whatever, is that people gravitate towards the specifics, the logistics. What am I going to be doing? Where am I going to be at? And nobody knows that. That's challenging, right? Anything can happen. Who knows where, you're going to be sitting on a beach, you're going to be going for hikes, you're going to live in a cabin, you're going to sail around the world, whatever it is. People get fixated on that as an answer to, well, it's not really their legacy, but that's what they jump to. So where I start with people, or what I encourage anybody to start with, whether you're nearing retirement or whether you're, just starting out in the world, is what do you want other people to say about you? Once you can refine that, now you can reverse engineer, Jason. And I think it's less likely that you're going to find yourself bouncing around aimlessly, or again, especially in the world of sports and talking heads, having other people try to dissect who you are and what you want to be. And again, why is Bill Belichick, well, why is he living the dream and going back to college? And, you have the opportunity to control that narrative, but it starts obviously by, coming up with that headline and then finding others to help figure out the best path to get there versus just trying out different paths and seeing what sticks. So I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does,
Jason, but that's, directly or indirectly, that's a lot of what I do on a day-to-day basis.
I look at the Belichick situation as somebody who's, changing oil while driving down the road type of a thing. I look at the Aaron Rodgers situation as this is a 5-car pileup, and everybody but the drivers are admitting it. I mean, everybody watching it has known it. They were watching it happen for weeks. It was just coming, and then it happened, and everybody but the people involved in the accident know it's happened. And then the Russell Wilson thing, honestly, I think both the Denver Broncos and Russell Wilson got rid of each other's backseat drivers and just put on the gas and moved ahead. Once they figured out that they were not going in the same direction, they both wanted to go to the Super Bowl, but they wanted to take different paths. It's like I always tell people, like, hey, listen, we could all go to Vegas. One of us is going to fly, one of us is going to drive, another one's going to take this route. If we all are on the same way, well, then we know how we're going to get there, this and that. If we take different paths, we have to have our own troubleshooting. We have to have our own strategy. We're not on the same page. We just cannot be on the same page because, like I said, there's troubleshooting that happens in the moment that it's nearly impossible to have every scenario played out. So anyway, I just found that interesting with some of the sports analogies as we look at energy and business, if you will, and that leads us to, annual reports, annual meetings. The one thing I always tell anybody wanting to get in the oil and gas industry who asks for my advice, or anybody who just wants to talk shop, I always tell them it takes a year before you get your first piece of business. And they look at me and they're like, what? And I'm like, honestly, if I'm out there selling, $1 million drills, I'm not going to put one sale into my projection until year 2, because the way the oil and gas industry operates is that about 95% of their budget, or 90%, or I don't know what the numbers are, but most of their budget is set for a year at a time. They get together in October, November, and December, and then they set out the strategy and the plan, and they spend the next 10 to 12 months managing those decisions. Now, they do have some discretionary dollars, so you might get a little piece of a crumb or business thrown at your way so they could try you out. And some of those oil and gas companies, they might even use the opportunity to make you put your price down a little bit. Joe, I've known that to happen too. And I've known people like me to put my price down to get that business, because that's the way the game works. So when you're advising people in the oil and gas industry, first of all, do you agree with my observation over the last decade that, generally speaking, it's a year out? Sometimes it might take a year for you to get a sale. You got to spend a year getting in front of the people. Hopefully you can get on the table during their annual meeting so you can get the business the next year. And then what advice do you have for people in the business, or looking at getting into the business, or maybe just need a splash of water in the face, something like that?
Yeah. So first, yes, your assessment of the normal cycle of business and decisions and budgeting is accurate. So yeah, a lot of it centers around an annual business plan. And then, as you said, it starts, as early fall into summer, and typically is wrapping up by early December. So yes, you're accurate there. In terms of my advice, well, again, it comes back to the concept of patience, and in particular, not telling people to be patient. That's not sound advice, right? There's plenty of folks who can say, hey, no, how do we pull this forward? How can we accelerate? What are all the creative ways to get in with a company, even if you weren't on their radar during their annual business plan process, or the time of year where they're hyper focused on vetting new suppliers, new service providers, et cetera. When I say patience, Jason, what I mean is, hey, how comfortable are you if you have to weather the worst case scenario? Let's just play out this scenario where, I mean, again, maybe that's not even worst case, but as you said, where you work, you're getting in front of them, you're investing some time, money, energy to make your case, but it's not going to play out this year. Heck, let's say it's not going to play out for 2 years. How do you proceed? Is that still worth it? What if you sit with that? How would you feel if that were the case? And that helps get people in the right mindset to understand whether they, whether they have the patience and the fortitude to push forward. Now, again, this isn't some defeatist approach. Clearly, again, if you need revenue, you want to get that sale in, 6 months and not have to wait 18 months, then yeah, you come up with a plan to get there. I'm not saying that you should settle for anything less, but you do need to be able to sit with that, again, worst case scenario, if you will, so that you can now come up with those sort of, either backup plans or mitigation approaches, or whatever else that give you the confidence that, ironically, the more comfortable you can get with that worst case scenario, it's going to make you stronger. And it could, again, this is maybe a little bit out there, but, I think it's a bit intangible perhaps, but it could give you that confidence and that boost to know that you got things covered. And now next thing you know, you're getting that sale sooner. You're getting on the radar sooner. You're having those meetings sooner because you are now comfortable with the opposite if it doesn't work out. So that's, again, call it advice, call you just, again, the normal line of questions that I would ask an individual in that scenario so that they can kind of feel those feelings, so to speak. But I'll tell you, it helps. It helps get people to take a breath, to relax and think more clearly, so that, again, ironically, they might not have to worry about those worst case scenarios.
I would add too, not only patience, but there is a certain of conservative calculation that needs to be involved. And I say conservative, not in a political way, but more in a fiscal way. Because if you're not going to get business for 8 to 12 months, you have to be very judicious with your trade shows and your lunches and your travel and your expenses that can really add up really fast, especially if you're not used to that type of activities, if you will. That's the one thing that I think anybody who is, and especially oil and gas, and I'm sure it's true in other heavy industry as well, and big ticket items, but when you're talking about a $5 million sale, as one sale, what do you expect? It's not an impulse buy. Some guy at a wine and cheese mixer isn't just gonna all of a sudden decide in the moment, yeah, let's do it. You bet. I mean, even if he says that, it's not a done deal. There's still probably several weeks of vetting that needs to go through it, and
all those lawyers, got all those contracts, got to go pass through all those lawyers. Yeah,
it's just the way it is. But so anyway, as we're wrapping up the annual reports and annual meetings, I tell people, keep your head up, but no, sometimes it does take up to a year before you can get any momentum going, and there'll be some dead ends along the way. That's just that first year of how it goes. But keep at it because it's almost like a springboard. It's springboards up pretty good and everything along those lines. But Energy Detox, how's the podcast going these days?
Yeah,
just had the 100 episode. In fact, we just had that on last week on the radio show.
Oh, all right. Yeah, we crossed the 100 episode mark. I think we're at 101 now. So we're on the next century of the Energy Detox, Jason. So yeah, I guess we wrapped up the first century of it with a lot of references, a lot of episodes that tied into the 20-year anniversary of the Marcellus Shale. So not obviously it was formed many years before 2004, but it was first fracked in 2004 by Range Resources. So, many a celebration there that the Energy Detox certainly latched on to, as always, weave together current events here in the industry and tie them back to leadership topics. So that's how we ended the year, kicked off the year with some, political themed episodes. Now, much like your work, Jason, the Energy Detox is apolitical, stick to the facts there, but, that doesn't mean we shouldn't. In fact, we should take relevant political headlines and bring it back to some conscious leadership topics and questions that people can ask. So kind of coming off of political season. And, I think as we move into the holidays and certainly kick off the new year, again, we'll have a couple episodes that weave in some practical things you could do from a leadership standpoint to make sure that you're taking advantage of that reset button. Again, focusing on the oil and gas industry, we're not a big fan of excuses, but I mean, as well as I that new year is a great excuse to try something new, to test something out, to make a couple mistakes that maybe you were not so comfortable making as you tried to hit all your year-end goals. So look for a couple episodes that again help people take advantage of those excuses, if you will, in kicking off a new year.
Did you have a favorite out of the 100 episodes? Is there one or two that stand out more than others?
Well, I'll say the most popular episode was way back, episode 8, where, so again, that was back in the year 2000. So a couple months after COVID reared its head. And it was the Authentically Fraudulent series. It was 2 separate episodes, so I think that counts as a series, right, Jason? Once you have more than one.
But technically it does, yes.
First episode in particular was, again, about the first of those 2 episodes was less autobiographical, but it did touch on me getting to the point where, again, I figured out who I wanted to be, what I wanted to be when I grew up, so to speak, and about my transition from more traditional oil and gas roles for 15 years into the world of leadership coaching. And that episode, again, and I'll still share that with people, especially in career transition. It's a good opportunity to start thinking about, again, no matter where you are in your career, what you want your legacy to be, right? Working backwards from those core values that you want other people to say, long after you've retired or left a job or whatever, you want other people to say, man, this man or woman, this is what they did. This is how they approached things, and they did it well. So it really starts speaking to your ability to craft that headline that you want to attach to yourself. And then ultimately, of course, getting to the point of, all right, well, how do you build that headline? How do you build that message? So, that one episode ties very nicely into our conversations, of course, about, again, what is that legacy? What are you working towards? Even before you get into the nitty gritty of how you're actually going to get there, Jason. So I'd say that, even if it's not, I don't know if it's my favorite episode, but I'll at least share that one as the most
the people's
popular.
Choice. Yeah, the people's choice.
People's choice. I like that. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
all three regular listeners of the Energy Detox, they are in the unanimity there when it comes to that episode.
You got me chuckling because back in 2020. Somebody asked me about doing a podcast, and I was kind of like, okay, well, I was walking out to my back porch or my back deck, and I said, well, I go, pretty much everyone's doing them now, so you have to either decide if it's something you're going to do for marketing or a hobby, or, define your time, defining your role. And I said, my neighbor here, he actually does part-time sports announcing on the local television station, so he has a podcast for work. I go, the one next to him, she's running for the U.S. House, so she's got a podcast for politics. The guy on the other side, he's actually running against her, so he has one. That's actually true. They were running against each other and living 2 doors down. I go, my other neighbor, he works for Microsoft, and his band does a monthly podcast. And I said, I'm pretty sure the guy down the street's cat, his podcast is more popular than all of ours. And so I said, that's the thing is you got to find your audience, you got to get in front of them, and you got to really define what it's going to be. But the way I'm thinking lately after doing these Landman reviews, I mentioned to you before we went on that the reviews that we're doing with Landman have gotten like 20 times the traction that any other interview we've done at the Crude Life or This Week in Energy or any of these kind of business to business high level platforms, if you will. Mm-hmm. And the way you got my mind thinking, Joe, when you were just talking about your podcast, I think you should just do cooking tips and then at the end just point out that it was made with natural gas. There you go. So you've got, all your cooking tips that you can do Emerald style. And then at the end, just mention that, this whole meal was done with Marcellus natural gas. That'll probably get more views than anything you and I have ever done combined.
Well, then again, if you're going to take it, then after you make the food, you can put it in a plastic container, and then people can take it away. And what is that plastic made from? But
there you go. But
but again, I mean, we've used the word patience quite a bit today, Jason. But that's where, again, knowing from the beginning and still today why I do the podcast and what its purpose is, it is to be a resource to provide relevant, timely, or in some cases timeless, but a lot of it is, timely insights that people can use to be a more effective leader. And what's nice is it doesn't matter what the audience size is. It doesn't matter if it's popular, if it's, relevant for one or two people and they stumble upon it, that's kind of my business model. It's meant to be this thing that's more behind the scenes. I am behind the scenes as a coach. And if this is a tool where, again, the right person is matched up with the right episode and it's, again, relevant for them in that moment, great. Now, again, will my tune change here over the next 100 episodes? Will I get to the equivalent of the crazy internet cat videos or the cooking with gas episodes that you suggested? It's possible, but I think unlikely given what I hope my legacy is as an executive coach serving the oil and gas industry.
I like that. Just start doing crazy cat videos just because they're popular. Yeah. I mean, why not? When I ran for student council in like 7th or 8th grade, I remember I would just on the signs, I would draw like a tree and then put vote for Spiess. And I'd draw like the Rolling Stone lips and then just things I could draw. It had nothing to do with anything. It's just things I could draw decently. So know your strengths, accentuate your positives, and hide your weaknesses, Joe. That's how we're going to wrap up this Witting Partners podcast today, because Joe Sinnott is an executive coach. We always try to, educate a little bit, create some awareness. And, some people, if they walk away, they learn something great. If they laugh a little bit, even better. But any final thoughts on today's topics, Joe? Is there two of you? Joe's?
That's only one that I know of, but we'll see. Final thoughts, Jason. Again, we'll come back to the word we've already said a couple times, patience. It's a lot easier to be patient when you know what your end goal is. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people who can't articulate who they want to be, who they want to be seen as, what they want other people to say about them, and how they want to feel down the road. So take that time to answer those questions. It will be invaluable, and it will allow you to be that patient individual, a patient leader, patient citizen, or I guess in this case here, patient guest on the Crude Life and all of your various media entities, Jason. So thanks as always. Thanks to the listeners, and go Irish.
Go Irish. Joe Sinnott, an alumnus of Notre Dame.
There's only one of me, so I'm an alumnus. There's only
alumnus, yes. And you can check him out at wittingpartners.com. You can listen to his podcast known as the Energy Detox, or you can catch him on the Crude Life, This Week in Energy, and a variety of other platforms that we send it out to and radio stations. So thank you, sir. We'll catch you next month.
Thank you.